Est-ce que Guy là,
Shorts traveling now. After still in London, I'm getting advice to and we're going to put out there.
Oh, hi. Well, I think you got tonight. Yeah, it's great. Thanks for the party.
Here and just send it on to Hollywood. Okay, very good. Nice to see you. Oh, very good.
Now, just a few words about the ARPF, the RAPF. It's the Association of Belgian Directors and Producers. It was created 19 years ago, and this association regroups 68 director-producers who thought that to be able to control the artistic content of their films, they should also be producers of their film. And I think it's quite nice that today we have two director-producers sitting at the table, because this is something we might talk about as well. Of course, the association is mainly a union fighting to protect and to defend the profession and different aspects, you know, dealing with ministries, trying to get better deals for the professionals. So it's mainly a tool, but we also like to talk about creation and to keep talking about how we make films, because we are also directors, creators. And this is why we have initiated this cycle of film lectures. Recently we had Bernardo Bertolucci, Stephen Frears, Terence Young, Denis Arcand, Atom Egoyan, and we will have many other people coming in the next few months, Kieslowski, Tavernier, James Ivory, so other people as well. But let's talk about today. So the principle of these lessons is that really we want to have a dialogue between directors. This is no journalistic talk, and you will be able to ask any question you want, you know, about how films are made, technical things. So in a while, after maybe a little hour of that conversation, there will be this microphone and you can ask any question. Please speak into the microphone, because we will record, we are recording the whole event, because it will be published later. So if you don't speak in the microphone, it will not be on the tape.
Well, that's theory anyway. Right, good morning, everybody. I'd first like to introduce somebody who's probably well known to everybody here today, Roger Corman on my left. Tell you a little bit about him for those of you who don't know exactly where he came from and what he's doing and what he has done. So I'll just give you a brief history. Born in 1926 in Michigan, he completed an industrial engineering degree, then took a job briefly as a story analyst at 20th Century Fox. Disenchanted with the studio protocol, he left to study English literature at Oxford, then returned to Hollywood as a literary agent, and then wrote and sold his first script entitled Highway Dragnet in 1953. This was quite a success and funded his very first film, A Monster from the Ocean Floor, which was shot on 6 days with a very small budget of $12,000 and went on to earn $60,000 on its first release. Obviously, this created quite a stir and resulted in Mr. Corman going on to produce and direct a wider range of films at very low budgets in all types of genre, from westerns to gangsters, science fictions, all rather successful. He's probably best known as a series of films in the early 60s, horror films based on the books of Edgar Allan Poe, films such as The House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum, The Raven, and The Tomb of Ligeia. The Poe films were critical and a great commercial success, yet surprisingly in the 1970s he opted out to escape major studio supervision by forming his own company, World Pictures. World Pictures, largest and most successful independent production company in the States, was a forerunner of Miramax and produced some of the high-quality, went on to distribute some of the high-quality Academy Award-winning films of foreign production companies, such as the films of Bergman, Truffaut, Fellini, Kurosawa, and Herzog. Corman's no stranger, in fact, to famous names and has often given people their first break. in the industry, either in crews or stepping right in as directors. Household names that we now know, such as Scorsese, Demme, Coppola, Cameron, Bogdanovich, and actors such as Nicholson, Peter Fonda, and Dennis Hopper, to name but a few. However, he decided to sell his distribution and production company, New World Pictures, in 1993, and decided to concentrate more on producing, going back to his roots. Having always detested what he considered the studio waste of waste of money in terms of vast exaggeration on budget, he maintained that a movie need not cost a fortune. He wrote a book to this effect called How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime, and has been since called the Pope of Pop Cinema, producing and directing in his career of over 36 years a sum total of over 300 films. As Jonathan Demme recently said, he's arguably the greatest independent filmmaker America has ever seen. That's Roger Corman. And on my right, I have Harry Krumel, who I must admit is, to me, being I'm much more on the American side of things, far less known, but Marie will fill you in about his details.
So Harry Krumel is, I think, for all of you, very well known, and he's certainly one of the most known Belgian filmmaker, and also one of the most personal in his work, with his own style. He was born in Antwerp from Israelite origin, and apparently that's what the story says. He started to be interested in filmmaking very, very young. His father has a Super 8 camera, not a Super 8, I think it was 8mm at the time. So that's how he started to make films. And it seems that you made a Western film with some of the people of your classroom. That's what I read somewhere. So horror movie. Okay, you see how journalists don't tell the truth. Anyway, when he was 19, he won an award at the Cannes Amateur Film Festival with a short film inspired from Cocteau. And when he was 28, he directed his first full-length feature called Monsieur Awarden. It was in '68. It was a black and white film adapted from a short story of Philippe de Pilsen, which he adapted with Jean Ferry, and I'm sure he will talk about that collaboration with Jean Ferry later on. And then he made, in 1971, Les Lèvres Rouges, which is the story of a woman vampire in our contemporary world, played by Delphine Seyrig. And this film too has quite an interesting story, because it was made with no funding at all from the state. It was made with private money, and I think Harry has much to say about that. You know, how to produce films nowadays. Then in '72 he made one of his most successful films, which is Malpertuis, known all over the world, adapted from a story by Jean Rey with Mathieu Carrière, Orson Welles, Michel Bouquet, Sylvie Vartan, Susan Hampshire, and also Dora van der Groen and Charles Janssen. Then in '75 the Comte van Joachim Stiller. A few years later, Uit Verloren Paradise, and The Secret of Love, erotic triptych. And recently he made Eline Vere, that I think most of you must have seen, which was adapted from a novel by Couperus. So he's shown that he's been very dedicated both to direction and production of his films. He has his own way. He's now teaching at the Film Academy in Amsterdam, lives in Antwerp. He has a lot of friends in Hollywood. So I think it's going to be really interesting. And last thing, he's also very much involved in the new Vlaams Film Institute, which is another professional organization in which he's trying to fight, just for the sake of creation. Harry Krumel.
Right, I'd like to actually, I think there's probably in the audience there's quite a few people who've actually at film school or contemplate the dreams of making films. So I'd actually like to start off by asking both of you, Harry, first of all. I know you both started off in a fairly jump-in sort of way, feet first. What actually would you think to people out there was probably the best way of actually starting out? Do you think film schools are probably the best way to start, or would you recommend working one's way up the ladder?
Since I have not done any film school when I started out, because there weren't any, or the ones I could go into, or I wanted to go into in France, for instance, they didn't accept me because I was a foreigner. And they had also numerous clauses saying that you can only have so many directors, so many cameramen a year. It's not a bad system. In fact, we've got a better system than we have now. We have 75 potential directors who go to the film school, which is an aberration in countries of our size. And I don't know whether film schools are good. I'm more of the opinion that the old system, artistic system of having a master and having disciples and between.
But you actually teach in a film school, so you actually...
Yes, but I'm doing it because I have the potential to try to save these children from fate worse than death, and because most of the colleagues I have, teaching colleagues, are not in the profession, and they are just teachers, and that's not sufficient. I think the only way to know cinema is to go to the cinema as often as one can, see as many movies as one can. Not that it is the only system, because there's a Dutch director who keeps looking at cassettes whole day, and it's called Dick Maas, and he doesn't make better films for that. And it's but it's a starting point, and I think the second thing is to want to make the best movie in the world, and want to make a movie, but not want to make a movie, but want to make the movie. And that's the only way of making movies, to want. You can have the ambition of making many. We are a contrast.
So what about you, Roger? Do you think that the school of life, or more like a film school? I know you obviously, probably Mr. Practical himself in terms of output and getting on and doing the job. But what do you hold the film schools in any esteem whatsoever?
I do hold film schools in esteem. I was recently Can you hear the? Okay. I was recently in the Ojai Valley in California at the Krishnamurti Institute, which is a very mystical kind of religion. And one of the master's teachings was that there are many paths to the truth. And I don't necessarily agree with that mystical concept, but I think there are many paths to becoming a filmmaker. Like Harry, I started directly in the industry and didn't have the benefit of going to film school, because there were very few of them at that time. Today there are more film schools, and most of the ones I know are quite good. So I think today the best path is through a film school. That does not mean it's the only path. I've worked with many directors, particularly, and producers who were writers at some time. Sometimes actors have moved up. I know one very good director, Jonathan Demme, who started as a publicity man. So you can take many paths, but of the paths currently available, I think film schools probably would take first position.
Right, thank you. And in terms of the amount, just the sheer amount and the sheer volume of films that you seem to do, and have done. I was just wondering now, in terms of, you must be absolutely pestered with scripts and people proposing to work for you and things like that. Just on the very basic level, how do you actually go about choosing a script? Presumably you get sent a lot. Do you have somebody who does pre-reading for you, and then you choose from that selection, or do you do it with co-producers, or what exactly is the process?
My company, New Horizons, makes about 20 films a year. This year, for a variety of reasons, we'll make a little bit more. We'll make about 25, 26, 27 films. Of those, generally about half of them are original ideas of mine. The other portion comes from people within my company. I have a story editor and a head of development. Sometimes a director will come to us with an idea. I like the idea very much of a writer-director, because at least when he gets on the set, he isn't likely to say, "Who wrote this damn thing? I've got to fix it right now." We occasionally buy novels or short stories, and a few times we have purchased screenplays that are submitted to us. As to how they're read, we have a group of interns from the UCLA and SC film schools who do the preliminary reading. They cannot say yes to a script, but they can say no. If they do say yes, then it goes to somebody in our development department, and they can recommend it, and then I will read more or less the final choices, and together with my story editor and head of development, we decide which ones we're going to take.
Right. So with an output of about 20 films a year, on Harry was just telling me earlier, in fact, he produces one film about every 5 years. It's obviously a bit of an imbalance, but in terms of, I know it's you're working now on in fact for the first time as a director, not particularly as a director and a producer, so you're actually producing your own thing. I was thinking, in terms of the actual mechanics, obviously that would probably take a lengthier time in terms of just being a director and having your own producer. I wondered if you'd like to tell us a bit about that process.
Well, I'm much against my wishes as a producer. I think it is very bad to be a producer and a director at the same time, because it's obvious that you're in a schizophrenic situation. And I even feel it now, because when I imagine shots, I say, well, will I do it or not, or because it's going to cost this and this and that kind of thing, which it should not impede creativity in the first stage anyway. That money consideration should not be in the forefront of your mind. That's a drawback, but it is it's a drawback easily overcome. But it's against my wishes, because my last film was completely destroyed, even if with a relatively good career behind my back and known as a good technician, at least. It was completely destroyed, even if I had last cut in my contract and everything. It was absolutely massacred, and it was so bad that you couldn't go back. So
Is that one of the reasons?
That suffering again.
Is that one of the reasons you've decided to produce yourself?
Of course, of course. Therefore, I will not have somebody even touching what I want to do, because I want only the audience to touch it. I want to do previews. I want to do anything, and I want to go from the screenplay stage, even consulting a lot of people. But I don't want, once it's set and that the audience likes something, that there is interference because of egos. That is something which I find extremely, except if the egos are for the movie. But if they are for the person who has the ego, I find it destructive, and that's the reason. Second thing is that now, the problem when being producer oneself is that, in my case anyhow, I want to have the best script possible at the start. So this is very complex, that new movie. It's a very big movie, and it's to be very honest with you, if I would not have been producing it myself, I would have kept it at the length it is now. and I would have camouflaged it by little tricks, that it is so long. But since I know I cannot make a good commercial movie of that length, I have to compress it. And that takes a long time. So I'm already writing, not constantly, but we are busy now with the preparation for 3 years. And to try and make a very bad novel into a very good movie. But that was the case with Gone with the Wind too. And I've been through 7 writers who were very bad, returned to the well, all these things. And then I think by myself that Billy Wilder wrote on Sunset Boulevard 3 years. So, and that was a small movie. So that I think, that to give you an example of what happens in Belgium, everybody said, how can you work so long on a script? You're mad, are you not wanting to finish it or something like that? I say, no, I want to make it fantastically good, so that you will all be baffled and that you will all fall behind it, and then you will say, oh well, nobody is as good as he is. So that's my only ambition.
But Roger, you started out, in fact, more on the direction side and then moved into production and then kind of going in between the two. Of late, you tended to concentrate more on production. I wondered, when did you actually encounter it for the same reasons? Did you find that there was a problem directing and producing, or did you just prefer the production side of things?
I'm a little bit in agreement with what Harry said on the concept of the director-producer having full control over the work. As Harry, I believe, feels it's a necessary evil to get that control. I think I like the idea of being a producer-director, because for the same reason I think Harry does it somewhat reluctantly. I think we're in agreement in the feeling that if you are both the producer and the director, you have control over your picture from the beginning. And as Harry says, there were certain problems with a producer on one film. I've experienced that myself. Generally, when I've directed, I've gotten along well with the producers, but I've always felt that if I can make all the decisions myself, my film will be more of a personal statement from me. So I like to work that way. More recently, since I've established a company, and we're making quite a few films, I don't have as much time as I formerly did, so I've only directed once. And I'm approaching Harry's record here as a director. I only direct occasionally, although I produce a great deal.
When you filmed World Pictures, in fact, was it actually a conscious step to deliberately opt out of major studio control, and for that reason to be completely independent and do your own thing?
It was partially to be completely independent, but also I had directed somewhere between 50 and 60 pictures in about 15 years. And the last film I did, I was really tired. I barely made it to the set every morning, and I said, I will take a year off when I finish this film, the traditional sabbatical, and then I will return to directing. During that year, I started New World Pictures. The company grew a little faster than I thought it would, and I spent most of my efforts as a producer and as a distributor, and it was actually 19 years before I went back to directing.
You once said, I've never made the film I wanted to make. No matter what happens, it never turns out exactly as I hoped. Would you say that was true, or since you've made probably about 200 films since you said that, would you say that was still true?
I think it's true for me, and I think it's true for most people working in any area of creativity. You have a goal, a magic form in the sky that you hope to reach. In reality, you never quite reach it. So I don't mean to say that I dislike all my films when I say I've not reached that goal. It's a little bit like being a Christian. You can never be a perfect Christian. All you can do is approach that goal.
Right. Do you want to talk a little bit about adaptations? Because in fact there's obvious similarities here. If we look back into probably your most commercially successful period, which was doing the adaptations of Poe's books. And now we think of Harry's done, I would say the majority of your films have been 50-50, have been, however, adaptations also of books. What would you say were the problems of actually adapting a book for the screen?
There are no problems, but let me just go back a little bit on that. There should be no confusion. I dream of the producer that would help me making a film, and not financially, but that would be the first viewer of the film. That would be a fantastic thing. They are far in between. They don't exist anymore. I guess they did exist. Also, we must take that with a grain of salt, because I imagine that the nostalgia about old Hollywood is interfering, and Roger would be able to tell much more about that. I don't think that Louis B. Mayer would that be my cup of tea. Also, Houston was of another. And about that turning out of a movie, never. I want to say just one anecdote. When I was very young and I went to see Alain Resnais, he said, "Mr. Resnais, I have to ask you a question." And he came and he made a rendezvous with me in the Hotel Lutetia in Paris, and he said to me, "Well, what can I do?" No, the first thing he said, "I've seen my package of Belga cigarettes." He said, "Ah, Pearl White." He said, "You know, you remember the old packages of Belga had this woman with a big hat on it." And then he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Resnais, I have this problem. All the films I have in my head, whenever I make them, they don't come out like I have them in my head." So he said in French, "Mais c'est la différence qui compte." It's the difference that is important between what you have in your head and what comes on the screen. And I think it's typically French answer, but it is a very good one. Now, to go back to adaptation, there is no problem, because it doesn't make any difference, except that I don't think that good books make good movies, because good books are sufficient on themselves, and that's why in their genres, I think in his genre, Stephen King will never make a good movie. Stephen King book will never make a good movie, because the books are very good in themselves as novels and for their ambition as novels. And that's why the reason on a quite different level, but not a better or worse, a different level is by Flaubert and Madame Bovary will never make a good movie, because the book is good already. Why make a movie about it? I mean, that is, and so you take trashy novels like Gone with the Wind and you make a good movie. I mean, that, if you make an adaptation. In terms of adaptation, the only difficulty is nowadays modern books are very thick because of word processors. And to compress them again to a manageable length is one of the most difficult things there exists. And I've never found out how really to keep the spirit of a book. You have to abandon every idea to want to do that book. You just use the anecdote.
But with the Edgar Allan Poe, in fact, I've recently read the actual originals, and they're actually really quite short, the actual Poe thing. So in fact, what you're saying is almost contradictory. In fact, what you've done is taken a very small thing and actually expanded it into something completely different.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I agree with much of what Harry has said. When you take a full novel and you try to make a motion picture out of it that runs 90, 100, 110 minutes or something, you're compressing and very possibly leaving out of necessity some very important elements. For me, I believe strongly in the concept of the original screenplay, the story that was designed or created for motion pictures. But I've occasionally adapted other works, and I prefer the short story for much the same reason Harry has said. With the short story, I can expand upon the short story. Some of the Poe short stories were only 2 and 3 pages long, so we could take the essence, the writers, Dick Matheson, Chuck Beaumont, and a few other writers I worked with at the time, we could take the essence of that short story, and we felt that we could do a better job of adapting that type of short story to the screen rather than the full novel.
you've both actually worked with fairly famous people, Orson Welles and a list of people. How do you actually go about casting your films in terms of your choice? Do you actually have premeditated thoughts about who you're going to use, or do you write with people in mind, or is it
Sure. You always write with somebody in mind, because if you write, because I'm not a writer, I work with writers, but I've done occasionally writing, but I'm a dreadful writer. It's absolutely ghastly. But you have a person in front of you. I wrote a small movie, and then I had Catherine Deneuve. Even I would never in all my life want to work with her, for reasons that all filmmakers know. It is because you lose more time to care for her than to make the film. You write with somebody, but for instance, with The Daughters of Darkness, they came to me. I wanted to make Malpertuis, and I wanted to had pretty people well pretty in my head for that, but I couldn't make it because it was a too expensive movie. So somebody came to me and said, "Won't you make a very cheap movie quickly, and it has to cost that?" And I went out in the street, and I saw a little book, Historia, and I saw the story of Countess Bathory. I said, "I'll do that, but we'll do it modern, so it won't cost anything, and we'll keep it in one hotel with 3 people and no people outside." So we wrote it for that, and in 3 days we wrote it. The story, the screenplay was written afterwards by Jean Ferry. And then I said, well, I'm making this trash, and I wouldn't want my mother to see it. I'm ashamed that my mother will see that I'm making erotic movies. And so to make it palatable, I want to have the most chic actress of France to play the lead part, so it will compensate. And I want Delphine Seyrig. At that time, you know, she was in films of Alain Resnais. How farther from horror stories can you get with Alain Resnais? And this chic actress who played Arabelle and that kind of things in the theater. I said, I want her. And fortunately, my friend Pierre Drouot also said, oh, yes, can you imagine that woman. And I said, well, yes, I want her, but only because she will compensate for the trash. And so everybody said, oh, you won't have her. But Delphine was a very intelligent person. And I went to see her in Le Jardin des Délices in Paris. I always remember she was playing there at the stage. And and I went to her, and she said, I love it. I said, yes. And, but in between, and there were the manifestations in Paris at that time of May '68. Oh my goodness! And she said, we leave the Jaguar in the garage. She said she was leaving Place des Vosges, and she said, elle will take the Mini because à cause des manifs, vous comprenez? Je vais à la manif. She was very leftish, and she went to the manif with her Mini and not her Jaguar. Yes, and but Delphine, and she fed me at our first encounter with un confit of Fauchon. Well, yes. And that I had her, and she wanted to do it, but I must say that in the meantime, the screenplay had been rewritten, and the dialogues by the man I want for the next film, Jean Ferry, who had been recommended to me by Pauvert. And Jean was the writer, for those who don't know, of many films of Georges-Henri Clouzot, Quai des Orfèvres.
How did Orson Welles actually become involved?
Orson Welles, I just wanted him, and we went to him, and Orson took money. I mean, Orson did anything. I mean, he went, he needed money all the time. Probably to eat and to drink. He drank quite a lot.
Roger, your story is slightly different, in fact, because you you actually started out using people for the very first time. Obvious example is Jack Nicholson when he was very young, Peter Fonda. I was just wondering, you went on to use them again several times later, but how much was that just a chance meeting, or how much do you put it down to your having a feeling for choosing people who are actually going to go ahead and succeed?
Well, at that time, I was a young filmmaker in Hollywood and just drifting around, going to parties, meeting people, and particularly seeing work on the stage that most of the young actors were doing. I was able to get a sense of who I felt were the best of the young actors. And since so many of my films at that time did involve the counterculture and youthful leading men and leading ladies, I was able to cast without too much regard for name value, simply young people I felt that were good.
But certainly now, producing so many films per year, I would imagine the fact that you do a certain amount would obviously give you certain budget limitations. Obviously, if you wanted Nicholson now to work for you a $12 million salary, that would probably eat up quite a few budgets for your salary. So I presume that's out of the question now for you. You prefer to use? Do you still continue to use people? Do you still continue to do research on young and up-and-coming actors?
Yes, as a matter of fact, not only actors but directors. 2 years